Cool. So welcome everyone to the masterclass on how behavioral patterns shape decision making, performance in the boardroom. And we're here with Seamus Gillen and myself today. My name is Natalie Donaire. I'm the marketing director at Onboard. And yeah, very happy to have you here, Seamus. We'll just give everyone maybe a minute or two to dial in.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to this session.
Yes.
And looking forward to getting participants' views and doing some market research, doing some live market research.
Exactly. It'll be a great follow-up from the webinar into anything that we didn't get to touch on.
And Natalie, I think I can see the chat box when people contribute, but if I'm not picking anything up, will you let me know? Please?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll kick off. It's 12:32. So Seamus, maybe you just want to pop over to the next slide.
Yeah, okay.
And then, yeah, so just a few housekeeping items. So all guests are muted by default. As Seamus mentioned, if you have any questions, you can send them through the Q&A or chat. Seamus and I will both be monitoring that throughout the masterclass. So we will pick up any of those questions. Any that we don't get to, we will, we'll follow up with those afterwards. And then we have a little bit of a survey at the end just to rate the webinar, just to let us know how you found it. And then we are, oh, sorry, 2 seconds. Yes, so Seamus, yeah, we welcome Seamus. Everyone should know Seamus by now. He's done quite a few of our webinars and masterclasses. So yeah, welcome to Seamus again. And then just for anyone who have not heard of Onboard prior to today, we are a board meeting management software company, and our goal is to inspire and enable board-led organizations to do their best work in the digital world. Onboard aims to simplify board meeting preparations, facilitate real-time collaboration, ensure secure communication. We serve over 5,000 customers and 12,000 committees. The Onboard platform hosts more than 55,000 board meetings each year for more than 100,000 subscribers in more than 50 countries. So it's great to have everyone here. There's a few details around how you can find us. We are obviously on LinkedIn, onboardmeetings.com. We will also be sending emails after this masterclass. So if you didn't catch any of that, we'll have links to that as well if you want to find out any more information. And then Seamus has written a wonderful book on building better boards. So a lot of content is some of the content that you will cover today, Seamus, comes from the book. So it's a great book. I've read it myself, love it. Always refer back to it whenever I have any questions or queries around how to succeed in this changing world. So I think you can find that on Amazon or Seamus's website as well. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Seamus, to bring us through the agenda, and then we can kick off with our poll shortly.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Natalie, and welcome to everybody. And looking for this to be a very participative interaction session for everyone on the call, including myself, to learn new things. The world doesn't stop turning. Every day is a new day, and we need to continually open our minds to new learning. So, and I'm part of that process myself. So I'm really looking forward to your feedback and your challenge as I offer you some thoughts on which to reflect. So we're talking about behaviors in the boardroom. And this is something that we covered quite briefly in our first session 2 weeks ago. And then we have a follow-up masterclass because we want to be able to go into these issues in more detail. And the masterclass means, for me anyway, going more widely, more deeply, and looking at other issues which affect behaviors in the boardroom. So the agenda is as follows. So the board as a team. And so this is the idea that before we look at the board as a legal entity, whether it's in the not-for-profit, higher education, NHS, corporate world, sport, whatever the sector, before we look at the board as an entity, we look at the board as a team. Now, this is a realization I came to a few years ago. I always used to approach my work with boards as legal entities, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there is also something to be said for looking at the board as a team. And therefore, this is something we covered 2 weeks ago, and somebody said 2 weeks ago, there are limitations to looking at the board as a team, and I agree that there are. Nevertheless, it is legitimate to see the board as a team, and then there comes a point where we stop seeing the board simply as a team, but we start seeing the board as a legal entity, and we move on to work with the board as a legal entity. So in terms of the board as a team, I'll look at two fairly well-known models, Tuchman and Lencioni. I look at those briefly. They are pretty significant models in the work as teams, of teams, and then move on to the board as an entity. 2 weeks ago, we didn't really go into the issues that follow on, safety and comfort and safety and trust. And I'm basing this work on the basic premise of the need to create a psychological safe space inside a room to allow everybody present to contribute meaningfully to a meeting. And that is known as a psychological safe space. So we will cover some of the slides we went over 2 weeks ago, just for those who weren't, to refresh the memory of those who were there 2 weeks ago, and to tell those who weren't there 2 weeks ago what we discussed. So we're going to talk about the psychological safe space, and then within that, the concept of safety and comfort and safety and trust. The paradox of tolerance, which is a really nice paradox, if you can call it that, which is very relevant actually to us at the moment. We have got elections in the UK on Thursday. We're just in the middle of elections in France last Sunday and next Sunday. And so the paradox of tolerance is a concept which goes beyond meetings and into life and into society. I want to spend a little bit of time on the role of the chair, and then sorry, apologies for the mistake, typo, the behaviors that matter. So I will be looking at 10 behaviors which I think are really important when we're doing this work with our boards, and all of you here on this call will be associated with boards, and I want to go practically into the behaviors that matter. We're going to do a number of polls throughout the session to make it as interactive as possible. And so we're going to launch a poll in a second when I give Natalie the signal, but just to introduce it first, we did this poll 2 weeks ago, and we ran the poll at the beginning of the session, and we ran the poll at the end of the session. And the outcome was different by the end of the session. And I want to show you, after we've done the poll this time around, I want to show you how the results differ between beginning and end 2 weeks ago. Natalie, if we can launch the poll now, please. So I'm asking you to identify the two factors. So you've got a choice of more than one. The two factors which you would rate most highly in terms of allowing a board to take high quality strategic decisions. What are the two factors out of those four? There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. So we're looking at discussing the areas, the board discussing the areas which create long-term value for the organization. Board members sitting around the table who have the attributes needed to contribute meaningfully to the discussions, the ability of the board members to work together harmoniously as a team displaying appropriate behaviors, which is the subject of this webinar, and having strong governance process in place, governance hygiene, which despite the term hygiene does not mean it's low value, it's anything but low value. It's essential for a board to be able to work effectively. So in my book, I explain that these are the 4 main drivers of the ability of any board to take decisions, high quality strategic decisions, looking to guarantee short-term, overnight survival and long-term sustainable success to grow the value of the assets of the organization for the benefit of all its stakeholders. So hopefully you've had a chance to vote on those 2. So let's keep these results up then for a moment, and I'm going to write them down so that I can then compare them to the next 2 slides. So discussing the areas which create, remember everyone's had 2 votes, so it's all going to sum to 200% rather than 100%. So discussing the areas which create long-term value, 63%. Board members with the skills and the knowledge, 44%. The ability to work well together as a team, displaying appropriate behaviors, 50%. And then equal third, strong governance process in place to allow the board to operate effectively, another 44%. So in pole position, we've got discussing the areas which create long-term value for the organization. So discussing the right issues inside the room. Secondly, having the right people around the table to discuss those issues. And then joint third, second is having the right behaviors inside the room, people knowing how to behave appropriately. And then joint third, having the people with the right skill mix, knowledge, experience mix, and so on, and having strong governance process in place. So actually quite well balanced. As I said, no right answer, no wrong answer. These are all important attributes, and they're all linked, they're interlinked, and any one on its own is important. And for any one of those to be significantly missing is going to create dysfunction inside the boardroom and an ineffective board. So when we ran this 2 weeks ago, we don't have the percentages, but we can look at the number of people voting. At the beginning of the webinar 2 weeks ago, the most important attribute, the most important feature was considered to be board members with the right skills, knowledge, and so on. And that was followed by having discussing the right issues, and then governance process being strong, governance hygiene being strong, and finally, the ability of board members to work well together. So just bear in mind those figures, because then we ran the poll again at the end. And Natalie, I just wanted to put you on notice. I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. I don't know if we'll be able to run that poll again at the end, but see if we can run the poll again at the end. Because when we ran the poll again, thanks Natalie, when we ran the poll again at the end of the last session, the numbers had changed. And so what we found by the end of the last session, which is maybe not surprising since we were focusing on behaviors, was that it was considered by the end of the session 2 weeks ago that the most important consideration in terms of allowing a board to take high quality strategic decisions was the ability of board members to work well together, i.e. to behave appropriately inside the boardroom. And then skills and knowledge, followed by discussing the right issues, and then governance hygiene, strong governance processes in place to allow the board to operate effectively. So from the beginning of the last session to the end, participants changed their mind and put a subject which was third, actually was last at the beginning of the meeting, board behaviors, to first by the end of the meeting. Now that was, there's a bit of bias in there because we spent an hour discussing board behaviors, but nevertheless, it did change participants' views on what the most important issues were. So I just offer that up to you, and we will run the poll that we ran at the beginning. We'll run it again at the end, and we'll see again whether people change their mind. So if we move on, so I'm talking first of all now as a board, as a team. So Tuckman, as an American, in 1965, created a model of team which you all have heard about, and which is still extremely relevant. So there are some theories which are created a long time ago which fall away because they're fads and they're trends. And then there are some theories which stay good. And this is one that stays good in terms of a set of thoughts which were created in 65, and that's nearly 50 years ago, and it's still good. And what Tuckman said was that every team forms, it then storms. Storming is literally storms, thunder and lightning, i.e. arguments, disagreements, getting things sorted out before norms become established, and then the team begins to perform. Tuckman said that all phases are necessary, but he also pointed out, we don't have time to go into the model in detail, but he also pointed out that good teams can jump the storming phase. They can go from forming to norming if they get aligned on strategic vision very, very quickly. But if they can't get aligned on strategic vision very, very quickly, even a board which is norming will go back to storming. It will go back into arguments, disagreements, trying to find new levels of alignment around the strategic vision again. And the alignment might be because the strategic vision isn't clear in itself. All phases were critical to team growth. But he also said interpersonal relationships and task activity would enhance the four-stage model. The model was developed by Tuckman himself and by others. But if I say to you that I'm working with 2 boards at the moment, where in 2024, I am using this model and they are finding it really, really useful, then that goes to show that the model is still relevant. So even though it was invented in 65, it's possibly the most important team model that has been created in the world of management thinking. If any of you have any other ideas about team models, by all means, post them in the chat. And that is what the model looks like. Forming, storming, storming intergroup conflict. Norming is the emergence of group harmony, and then performing. Okay, so we're looking there as the board initially as a team. Possibly the other biggest team model, which I know people have used with boards, I tend not to. It's just I've got other models I can use, but it's the Lencioni model. And Lencioni described this as teamwork as the single most untapped competitive advantage. Now, there are other people who say the single most untapped competitive advantage is things like culture and so on, but culture, values, behaviors, teamwork, they all fit into the same model. I outline a model in the book which pulls all of this stuff together. But what Lencioni says is that if you're going to have a team that works, everybody needs to trust everybody else. And if there's not trust and vulnerability-based trust, then the team is never going to work. So the bedrock of any team being effective is trust. Then, interestingly, Lencioni goes on to talk about conflict around ideas. So when there's trust, team members are able to engage in unfiltered constructive debate of ideas. On that basis, they then commit to decisions, and then they hold each other accountable to a clear plan of action, and they are willing to hold each other accountable. and then they focus on achieving collective results. So the ultimate goal of building greater trust, conflict, commitment, and accountability is one thing, the achievement of results. So Lencioni is another very good model. So you've got Tuchman, forming, storming, norming, and performing, and then you have Lencioni. So that might be as far as we want to take the board as team in this particular webinar. But if you read the book, or if you just do your own separate research online, you'll be able to find out more about the Tuchman and Lencioni models, and they are both very relevant and very powerful. So if we begin the conversation about the board as an entity, we move to different kinds of considerations, which is on a board, a typical board of a university, or an NHS trust, of a corporate, of a charity, sports national governing body, or whatever. We're looking ideally for three characteristics. We're looking for the members of the board to have sector knowledge. You know, if you're going to sit on the board of Marks and Spencer's, you want to have some idea of fashion, high street fashion, although, as I've said many times before, mentioning Marks and Spencer's and high street fashion in the same breath is probably a contradiction in terms. But you'd certainly want to know something about food, because Marks and Spencer's food is very popular and is a very profitable part of their business. You also want the directors on the board to be independent of the entity and to be working in the best interest of the entity, so that they are not conflicted. And you want the board members to be able to exercise what I call boardcraft, which is the knowledge of how to behave as a director on a board. And that's what we're going to be focusing on now. Boardcraft is really about behaviors. So we will take sector knowledge as a given. You either have it or you don't. And we'd like to think that most people on the board will have knowledge of the sector in which the board operates. Independence, we either have it or we don't, and we know that we have it or we know that we don't have it. Boardcraft is altogether a far more challenging area of conversation. Do board members know how to behave inside a boardroom? And that's a whole issue of board behaviors. And although we don't have the slides to go with it today, the whole area of board behaviors came up, emerged after the 2007 and 8 global financial crisis. 2007 was the subprime crisis in the US, where property was being overvalued, particularly on the West Coast, and led to the subprime crisis, which then had an effect on liquidity and the creditworthiness of the institutions who were financing real estate in the US, and that then led to the global financial crisis in 2008, which saw most of the Western banks teetering on the edge of financial collapse and ruin. And it was at that time that Sir David Walker, who chair of Barclays, was asked to conduct a review into what had happened in UK banks in particular during 2007 and 2008. And what Sir David Walker identified in the Walker Report in 2009 was the concept of behaviors, was the idea that board directors did not know how to behave on the boards on which they were sitting, and they let incumbent management rule the day. They let the management team, the home team, take all the decisions. They failed to do what non-executives should have done. And there in 2009, we're now in 15 years ago, began the whole body of work and investigation into behaviors inside the boardroom. So it is factually to Sir David Walker and the Walker Report in 2009 that we attribute the beginning of the work on behaviors inside the boardroom. Now, if any of you have any alternative ideas on that, you're very welcome to post them in the Q&A or the text comments box so that we can discuss those as well. But that is where I've said in my book, the work on behaviors began. Now, why do behaviors matter? So I work with boards all over the world to say, you know, what are you there for, directors? What are you doing sitting inside this room? And at the end of a board meeting, have you been any good at what you're supposed to be doing? And it's quite interesting that if I start that discussion from the word go, a lot of directors, not just in Southeast Asia or the Gulf or South Africa, but even directors in this country, in Ireland, in Europe, struggle to know why are they sitting inside the room? What's their main role as a board director? And of course, the main role of a board and the main role of the board director is to take high quality strategic decisions, which is what I was mentioning earlier. And the purpose of those decisions is to guarantee overnight survival and long-term sustainable success. We saw during COVID 2020 through to 2022, 23, we saw the fact that overnight survival was not a given for many organizations around the world. They collapsed during COVID. So it's not an exaggeration to talk about overnight survival. And we still see businesses going bust overnight, even now, and there's no COVID. So overnight survival is a genuine concept. Long-term sustainable success is really what most boards should be aiming for. And Bill, you're saying behaviors are wider importance than just in the board. So inadequate challenge from the board, as you say, Bill, nurtures dysfunctional behaviors throughout the executive. So and on into the rest of the organization. So again, you're quite right, Brian, we don't have time to talk about it now, but it is possible to talk about the fact that everything starts at the top. And if we don't get the appropriate behaviors inside the boardroom, then that is perceived very strongly by the executive. It's perceived very strongly by senior management who are coming into the boardroom to present, who are not members of the executive, and it feeds on into the rest of the organization. So we know as a fact, in terms of culture, values, and behaviors, that if we don't have the right culture, values, and behaviors inside the boardroom, we are not going to have the right culture, values, and behaviors in the executive team, and then into the marzipan layer of management, and then further down into the grassroots of the organization, which is why we talk about the tone from the top and the mood in the middle and the buzz at the bottom. So the tone from the top is set by the board. The mood in the middle is what gets picked up by management and middle management. And then the buzz at the bottom is what gets picked up by workers at the coalface who see the way their line managers are behaving. So if we don't get it right inside the boardroom, it's not going to happen in the rest of the organization. And so the purpose of the board, take high quality strategic decisions that grow the value of the business in the long term. And the people who can make that happen are those sitting around the table, who, particularly the non-exec directors, who bring their wider knowledge of what's going on in the outside world with a up-to-date knowledge of what's happening inside the organization, bringing those different perspectives to bear to develop a conversation inside the room, which leads to good judgments being made and then good decisions being made. It's then for the chair to triangulate those views expressed and reach a consensus on the way forward. So the continuum of value that we're looking for inside the room is the right people having the right discussions with the right behaviors, underpinned by sound governance process. That leads to high quality conversation, which leads to high quality judgments, high quality decisions, and then high quality business outcomes. That's what we're aiming for. And I can say that that continuum does exist. That's what we're aiming for. It's if anyone has an alternative point of view on how we get to good decision making and how we get to good outcomes, then let's have that conversation. But from all the work I've done, and I've written about it in the book, that is the value chain inside the boardroom. And so in the middle of that value chain is directors explaining exhibiting appropriate behaviors. And then, as we said, at the end is for the chair, with the help of colleagues, to triangulate the views expressed and reach a consensus on the way forward. So behaviors is in the middle of that value chain. And that's why they matter. And the drivers of high quality decision making, as we said earlier, and this is where I asked you to express a view. Do board members discuss the right issues? Do they have the right skills to bring to bear to discuss those issues? Do they perform in an appropriate way, board craft, board behaviors, to create the right board dynamic? And is all of that underpinned by the right systems and processes? And I just want to go back to a point that I'd forgotten in the previous slide, that when I talk about non-executives bringing their knowledge of the outside world into the business, inside the board meeting, I am expecting them to do that on the basis that they also know what is happening inside the room, inside the organization. So there's no point in non-executive directors just coming in and bringing to bear their knowledge of the outside world if they haven't bothered to find out what is also going on inside the organization and how the world has changed, not just in the outside world that they inhabit, but how the world has changed inside the organization that whose business performance they are overseeing. And one of the biggest weaknesses we find with non-executive directors is that they do not spend enough of the appropriate kind of time inside the business in order to understand how the business has changed since the last time they were at a board meeting. So if they don't understand how the business has changed, then the knowledge they bring of the outside world is of limited importance. So that's a controversial thing for me to say. But when I'm doing board evaluation work or board effectiveness reviews, I'm looking to see how much time those non-executive directors have also spent inside the business to understand the way things inside the organization have changed since the last time they turned up at a board meeting. So again, if you have a point of view on that, then very interested to hear that. So the drivers of high quality decision making are these 4 areas. And just to remind you, you voted the first issue focusing on the areas which create long-term value is the most important from your perspective. The second most important was behaviors, and then joint third, the skills and competencies of board members and governance hygiene. Okay, so we'll look to see if we think we can do it, whether we can launch the poll at the end again. Okay, so underpinning the area that we're focusing on now is the concept of psychological safety, the psychological safe space. And it's the idea that people can speak their mind without being punished, without being humiliated, without being pushed into corners, without being victimized, marginalized, isolated, or whatever. Again, we don't have time to discuss in this call concepts like groupthink or the Abilene paradox, which are explained in the book, in order to minimize conversation inside the room. So if you want to read more about groupthink and the Abilene paradox, that's in the book. But the idea of the psychological safe space is that it opens up a safe space for board members to contribute. And this is where team comes into play, a shared expectation held by members of a team that they can take risks without being shamed by other team members. And it's not, again, it's not an exaggeration to say that I have seen, and you will have seen, examples where board members have been marginalized for saying things which other people feel they shouldn't have said, but which they felt the need to say, whether that's the elephant in the room, case of the emperor's new clothes, trying to confront denial in the room, and so on. And sometimes board members can make themselves quite unpopular by speaking their truth. So psychological safety is the environment that encourages, recognizes, and rewards individuals for their contributions and their ideas. And this is why we want people around the table. We want their contributions and their ideas, because all of us know that we can't think as much as a combined contribution from 5, 6, 7 people sitting around the table who will give us new perspectives on what we're thinking and improve the quality of decision making. So the concept was popularized by Amy Edmondson of Harvard. She kind of captured the zeitgeist. She wasn't the first person to talk about it, but in modern times, in modern thinking, most people now attribute Amy Edmondson as being the kind of modern day guardian of the concept, or sponsor or patron of the concept of psychological safety. It didn't start with her, but she popularized it. And she pointed out that regardless of a team's makeup, its success will be largely down to its members' tacit beliefs about interpersonal interaction, and whether they have a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Now, at that point, I just want to ask you, Natalie, if you can still hear me okay, see me okay, and you can still see the slides okay. I just want to double check on that everything is still working on the other side. So
yes, all good, Seamus. We can hear you. Did break up a little bit a few minutes ago, but it was literally for a few seconds, and you're back. So yep, we can hear and see everything clearly.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, Chris is saying, in your experience, Chris, one of the biggest dangers to effective boards is the existence of groupthink, whether initiated by the CEO, organizational culture, or both. I agree with all of that. Groupthink, yeah, we can touch upon that later, and I do have a poll question later about who do we think is most responsible for getting the right mood inside the room. And so I work in the HE sector, for example, and vice chancellors, the CEOs of universities are very important, very powerful. CEOs of most organizations are very important and very powerful, and they can bring a particular culture to bear, which isn't always the most healthy culture. So let's explore that a bit more. So thank you very much, Chris, for that contribution. So Steve, you're saying, Stephen, the chair is the main driver for psychological safety. And well, I agree with you, and let's discuss that a little bit more when we come to some slides later on. So what's the return on investment? Well, as you say here, psychological safety is like oxygen. We notice it when it's not in the room. When it is in the room, then we can all breathe easily. And I've worked with boards which have not been happy places. And I've also worked with boards which have been very happy places. And in a happy place board, you can see board members growing. And I've actually heard some board members say that they turn up for the board meeting because it's their CPD, their continuing professional development. And they get so much out of it. But in a board meeting where you don't have the safe space, people begin to shrink and disappear. And Langton, you're saying psychological safety is good as a transparency on a board. So absolutely. So again, another important concept. So leaders, chair, needs to take extra steps to be aware of individuals' perceptions of the psychological safety they're experiencing. That requires unmistakably very high levels of empathy from the chair. And in case I forget the point, and to go to what you were saying earlier, Chris, we do need the chair to take responsibility for all of this. But one of my contentions is that if other board members don't understand what the chair is trying to do, if the chair has high levels of empathy, but other board members don't have high levels of empathy, what the chair is trying to achieve may not be achieved. And the effectiveness of the chair's interventions may be stunted because other members of the board don't understand the need for them also to exhibit high levels of empathy. So when we come to look at behaviors later, it'll be interesting to see how highly you rate empathy in the boardroom as a behavior which is important. And vital to clarify intentions and check in for possible misunderstandings. So a vital role of the chair is to check in and check out. To check in at the beginning of the meeting, check in where people are as the meeting begins, and to check in regularly throughout a meeting as to how people are feeling. And then to check out at the end of a meeting, and even to check out at the end of a particular discussion. Now, if there's a conflict in the room, again, we don't have time to discuss the management of conflict and tension in the room. But if there is tension and conflict in the room, checking in to find out why that's happening, and then checking out to bring all of that to an end and move on with the meeting. These are great skills of a good chair. And I've seen good chairs do this. I've also seen poor chairs not do it. And so the situation deteriorates inside the room. And in terms of that tension and that conflict, we need the chair to understand what is going on and to stop things before they spiral out of control. And so checking in and checking out are really useful skills for a chair to understand how to connect with people and see people who are unhappy, the frowns on the faces, the body language that says somebody's not happy with the way a conversation is going. And as Adam Grant says, it's not psychological safety if people can only voice what you want to hear. The goal is not to be comfortable, it's to create a climate where people can feel uncomfortable. Okay. So, and then this recap of Amy Edmondson's work, it creates a virtuous circle where people are comfortable admitting their vulnerabilities effectively. Now, that may go a bit too far if we're talking about boards. It's not normal for board members and non-executive directors to admit vulnerability, but actually that is part of the whole thing of empathy, is people leaving ego at the door. And it'd be interesting to hear from you whether you are involved with boards where ego has been parked at the door, or where ego has not been parked at the door and people bring egos into the room. So maybe it'd be just interesting, just put it into the chat box if you wouldn't mind. Just put it into the chat box or in Q&A. If the main board with which you are associated has left ego at the door or has ego in the room. So if it's been left at the door, put yes. If ego has been brought into the room, put no. So the main board with which you're associated, has it left ego at the door? So yes. Or has it brought ego into the room? Because ego in the room is a major source of behavioral dysfunction. So Caroline, yes. Abasoye, yes. Cheryl, yes. Chris, yes. So far, most people, the biggest ego in the room is the CEO, always, only, and forever, of course. Yes. Suzanne, not everyone, some bring their ego with them. Well, of course, we know that there's no space for ego in the room. And so again, we can look at that when we talk about behaviors. Okay, so if we move on, so what I've done up to now is stuff that we did in the previous session 2 weeks ago. So here's some new material. So I want to talk about the difference and similarities between comfort and discomfort and danger and safety. And this is a really useful tool, a really useful model for analysis. And I know some of you on this call are secretaries, you're servicing boards. Some of you might be chairs and so on, or NEDs. But where we're looking for is safety and discomfort in a room, whether as a team or as a board, because that's where people grow and make progress. So top left-hand corner, where there's danger and there's a false sense of comfort, people get hurt. And there's a good example of that at the moment, which I'll cite in a second because a slide speaks to that. Bottom left-hand corner, where there's danger and discomfort, people avoid going there because they know there's a risk they're going to get hurt, so they just don't go there. Top right-hand corner, people in a comfort zone and it's safe. there's no growth. There's no growth in personal development and in that meeting, and there's no growth in the quality of the discussion in that meeting. So you only get growth in the quality of the conversation if there is safety, but there is discomfort. Okay. Now, if any of you have any views on that, it'd be interesting to know. So safety and comfort. Safety is not the same as comfort. Good fitness trainer will make sure that you are uncomfortable, but will help you to be uncomfortable safely. They won't. They will help you to develop your muscles without actually harming or injuring your muscles. So the job of the leader, the job of the chair, is not to protect the board from discomfort. It's actually to have the uncomfortable discussions, and to help people push through the discomfort in order to take the best possible decisions. So as that research from New York University says, a culture that allows a concept of safety to creep so far that it equates emotional discomfort with physical danger is a culture that encourages people systematically to protect one another from the very experiences that they need to go through in order to grow and for the conversation to be healthy. So disagreement is not the same as danger, and ideas are not the same as violence. And these are important concepts that in terms of understanding the dynamics inside the room. The second bullet point is a little bit more challenging and problematic. I'm not sure I agree totally with it, which is that the safest way to overcome psychological pain and discomfort is to confront it. Sometimes avoiding triggers is a safer place to go rather than confronting triggers, but you may have your views on that. But the better people get within a room of knowing that there's going to be an honest conversation, then the better they are equipped to have the challenging conversations that lead to high quality decision making. So the idea of taking risks which endangers people is something which is really important. And immediately I thought of this example, which I mentioned earlier. I've forgotten his name, but the Hollywood actor who brought, somebody will remind me on the chat, who brought the gun onto the set of Rust. What's his name? And subsequently discharged the gun and killed the cinematographer, Alec Baldwin. Thank you, Caroline and Patricia. So that is a very good live case study, because it continues to be live, of somebody who took risks inside a room in a way that created danger. So that's an analogy. Alec Baldwin on the film set of Rust is the good example of somebody who brings jeopardy into a room and brings danger with that jeopardy that they bring into the room. And that jeopardy, that risk will hurt people and damage people. And that could actually damage people psychologically, so that they decide that they're not going to engage in any further conversation in that meeting. And if it continues, they may actually not feel more and more distance from the work of the board. So some risky behavior actually threatens a group's psychological safety. So risky behavior where people are challenging to the point of being rude, or even worse, being sexist or misogynistic or bullying, brings damage into the room, and it doesn't work. So speaking up with a point of view that's uncomfortable is good, but shutting down someone who says something uncomfortable is bad. So we need to get that balance right, and it's the job of the chair to create that correct dynamic. So feeling safe enough to hurt people means that there is no safety. And the irony of a black and white view of psychological safety is conflating safety with comfort. So by making it appear safe and comfortable, we can ironically make an environment dangerous. So if we go on to talk about safety and trust, which is a related concept to do with safety and comfort and safety and trust. So psychological safety is trust amongst a group rather than just between two people. So we're not talking about an interaction between two people, we're talking about the interaction amongst a group of people. And that means a board meeting, that means a team meeting. The bigger the group, the harder it will be to maintain psychological safety. You must have trust in everyone in the group in order to be able to go out on a limb. So when I work with boards, I often say, so John F. Kennedy said that the speed of the convoy is the speed of the slowest ship. If you want to stick together, then you've got to go at the speed of the slowest ship, which makes you all vulnerable to a submarine torpedo. And the progress on a board and the speed of a board and the effectiveness of a board is the effectiveness of the weakest member. So you could have a board of 10 and 9 of them are very strong. But if you've got a very weak member, then the strength of the board is the strength of the weakest member, because it's that member who will get you into difficulty, that board member. Now, if you disagree with me, please say so. So let's have another little quick bit of typing. Do you agree that if you have a particularly weak board member, that they can endanger the safety of the rest of the board? So put agree if you agree with that. If you feel that the board members' risks to the board as a whole can be marginalized and mitigated, put disagree. So if you feel you've got a weak board member, do you think that weakens the board as a whole? Agree. Or do you think you can mitigate against that, and therefore that means disagree? So what do you think? So, okay, so Caroline depends on the size of the board. So that's really interesting. Disagree, disagree. There's a real mixture of agrees and disagree. So Keith is saying you can mitigate. Stephen, you disagree, but you agree that with Caroline, it depends on the size of the board. Susan, it depends on the impact of their weakness. So that's interesting, and that's Patricia. It only takes one to cause havoc. Maybe I'm a bit fundamentalist on this, but I'm slightly more of the view that a weak board member causes damage. And they should be taken out of the board. That's my view. I agree that the measures can be taken to mitigate against, to marginalize, but if we're trying to marginalize a board member, I call that empty chair syndrome, i.e. they might as well not be sitting in that chair, they're not present and they're not contributing. And therefore, why are they there? So the short-term measure may be to mitigate the risk. The longer-term play is to get them out of the boardroom. But interesting that it was almost 50-50 in your comments, so that was interesting. So some of you are not as fundamentalist as I am on that particular question. Anyway, the point here is that the bigger the group, the harder it is to maintain psychological safety. And particularly if you had a large group and there's a cabal of 2 or 3 or clique of 2 or 3 or 4 out of a group of 10, then that could really be destructive to the dynamic of the room. So in terms of trust, safety and trust is earned by the presence of things like integrity and benevolence. And so, there is going to be a question later on in this, and where you would rate trust in the room as an important behavior. But the thinking on this slide is integrity and benevolence are deal breakers. So no amount of skill or ability can make you trust someone who displays a lack of integrity, or whom you don't think has your best interest at heart or the interest of the entity at heart. So that is maybe where we get back to this issue of inappropriate behavior on a board. So first of all, Bill is saying the timescale is important. You know, is it a short-term problem? Is it a longer-term problem that you need to get rid of that person? And Dan is saying, what do you mean by weak? Not bringing anything to the party or having different views. I mean, Darren, a wrecker. So certainly not bringing anything to the party. I would say, why are they there? Surely that chair can be occupied by somebody stronger. Not having different views for consideration. I think that's really important, and we need to embrace that difference in perspective. I suppose I'm talking about somebody who's a behavioral wrecker. Stephen, point 2 is spot on. Integrity and benevolence. You know, no amount of lack of integrity can make you trust somebody. So Chris, you're saying the concept of psychological safety and all it entails is positive as long as it is underpinned by real collective responsibility when the decision making has taken place. I agree. So we're all in it together, joint and several liability, collective responsibility. We all go to jail together. We can have a disagreement in the room, but when we take the decision, we all move. So this thing about collective accountability, I'm going to ask you a question about that as well. That for me is a very important behavior inside the room. And, you know, there's so many behaviors which are important, but, you know, if you do have somebody who's lacking integrity and they are a wrecker, then arguably, you know, if they're not consistent with the values and the culture of the organization, then they're probably toxic, and probably need to be moved off the board. And just for a second, I just wanted, I mean, this goes more widely, but this is a masterclass, so why not go a little bit more widely? So the idea of tolerance, being tolerant to other people, the paradox, which was captured by the philosopher Karl Popper, is that if we are too tolerant, we allow intolerance to grow, and then intolerance becomes dominant. So although it's seemingly self-contradictory, the chair might have to take a view that to maintain tolerance and a liberal perspective inside the room, occasionally the room might have to be intolerant of intolerance. And there's a wider political perspective in terms of the elections in France at the moment, the elections in the UK. So it goes more widely, but there will come a point where sometimes the chair might have to make a judgment about what is acceptable in how far people go. Just going back a point down and saying if directors are being reckless and they need to be removed. So it's the degree to which directors don't perform and don't behave in the room, which is a matter of judgment, it's a matter of degree. And so in terms of the paradox of tolerance, so Stephen, do you mean woke when you say being intolerant of tolerance? No, I don't. I think the way I would view it, the way I would articulate it, is that I believe all chairs should be liberal. What that means for me is that all chairs should be open to the views of all the members sitting around the room. If you're the chair of a governing body on a school, and I sat as a trustee, a governor on a governing body of a school, I realized that as governors, we had to be tolerant of all the things going on at pupil level inside the school, even though our own views might be intolerant, because we needed to allow those pupils to grow in a way that they could grow safely in terms of their own personal lifestyles. But there is a level, I mean, for example, the trans debate is a really important debate for young people and older people, and it's a very divisive issue. I suppose the point is, at what level, at what moment does a chair have to say, the view that you are expressing, director number 6, is, I think, harmful to the life experience of directors number 7 and number 8, and I don't think we should entertain that view more widely. I think we've heard you, but let's leave it there. So I suppose it's when directors are expressing views which are harmful to the interests of other members on the board, or even other members of the organization's ecosystem, that the chair has to say, well, look, let's stop it there. It's not safe to carry on. But be interesting to know what people think. So let's have another quick bit. Let's have another round on the buzzers. Do you agree with my basic premise that the chair of a board should be liberal and open-minded? Say yes if you agree that it's a very important attribute of a chair to be liberal and open-minded, or no if you disagree. So Bill, yes, absolutely. Stephen, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so that for me is that's a black and white, that's a binary question. There's no gray there. If the chair isn't to fair limits, Langton, yeah, I agree. And Langton, you're from Africa, and there may be different cultures in Africa from in the West or in other parts of the world. But the general proposition is, if the chair isn't willing to listen to every view, then we've got a problem. Okay, so let's move on from the paradox of tolerance. But it's an interesting point that there has to be a limit to what can be discussed in the room, and what allows a discussion to flower and flourish, and what could lead to a harmful dynamic, harmful vibe inside the room. So the conclusion is that psychological safety means nothing you say or do will be used against you, as long as you mean well, and you reciprocate. Now, we've moved beyond these simple concepts of psychological safety in the past 20 minutes when we've been discussing the views of the board and the views of and the behaviors of directors on the board. So some of this stuff takes us beyond simple team dynamics and more into board as entity dynamics. Now, we spoke earlier, and Stephen commented earlier, and we've just been asking the role of the chair. So often it's been possible to identify the role of the chair as a chef d'orchestre, the leader of the orchestra, the person whose role it is to hear all the musical instruments, to hear all the voices sing, to hear all the instruments sing, to bring on all the world view. So it's quite nice imagery to talk about the chair being the person who brings on board the views of everybody in the room. Now, I've often said that the chair should not be playing an instrument themselves, but I have actually worked in other parts of the world where the head of the orchestra does actually carry a violin or some other instrument and joins in. So that analogy doesn't work totally, but the point is, the chair is not there to lead the discussion. The chair is there to coordinate the discussion and to corral the discussion. And I still come across many situations where the chair thinks it's actually their role to lead the discussion. That is 100% wrong. Again, that is a binary view from my perspective. So I'll ask you just to very quickly put into the chat box, do you believe that there are any circumstances where the chair should be leading the discussion, Or do you think that, so that's a yes, the chair can sometimes lead the discussion, or do you consider that the chair should always be mediating and corralling and coordinating the discussion before then weighing in at the end as a board member with their own view? So yes, if you agree that they can sometimes lead, no, your view is that they should always introduce and let the discussion unfold, having offered sufficient parameters before they then contribute their own view at the end. Yeah, mainly no. So so maybe I haven't asked the question in the best way. I think clearly the chair has to set the parameters of discussion. But what I've seen the chair do a lot of the time is say, and my view is, and in my own view, that is wrong. The chair should say, this is the context and the parameters of the discussion. Let's have the discussion. And then at the end, the chair says, and this is my personal point of view as a board member, because otherwise there's a risk that they will shut the conversation down. And I owe it to Bill, who's on the call at the moment, to point out that actually Bill told me that this imagery was actually more appropriate, because if we go back to the previous imagery, a classical music concert, big orchestra, nearly always starts in the same place, pretty much follows the same route, unless musician plays a wrong note, and then ends up where you all expect the concert to end and everybody applauds. Whereas actually the board is one more of organized chaos, like a jazz ensemble, where you still got a chair, you still got a leader at the front who's coordinating the way that people interact. But until the end of the discussion, one is never really totally sure where that discussion is going to go within limits. And so maybe the chair is more like the leader of a jazz ensemble. Okay, so we're going to go on to meeting behaviors. We've got about 20 minutes to go through behaviors. But Natalie, I'd like you to launch the next poll, please, which is I'm giving you 4 choices. I want you to just to mark up 2 of them. Which 2 people would you give the greatest responsibility for keeping peace inside the room? When we look at behaviors, which of those 2, I mean, again, maybe no right, let's keep it up for the moment, Natalie, please, because I think this may lead people to scratch their heads. No right answer, no wrong answer. There's probably one clear right answer, but after that, I'm not sure what the right answer afterwards is. Which 2 roles would you say bear the greatest responsibility for maintaining healthy behaviors inside the room? So you can choose 2 out of those 4. And that might not always be in real time in the room. It could also be away from the board meeting after the board meeting has happened. So please bear that in mind. It's not always live and in the room, but it's perceiving what goes on in the room and then having a conversation afterwards. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance. So let's see what the results are. 100% the chair. Well, absolutely. I don't think we need to spend any time on that. Secretary with 23%, the CEO with 36, and NEDs for 45. So chair with 100%, well, agree totally, that's their role. If they don't know that, find another chair. But it is interesting. I would say inside the meeting, the NEDs, I think the chair, the CEO shouldn't really, well, the CEO does have a responsibility for being humble and parking their ego at the door. I completely agree with that. Away from the meeting, I could see the CEO and the secretary playing a role with the chair to see how did that meeting go, what went wrong, what went well, what do we need to do, what should we do differently. So that's interesting. So and I'm now going to ask you, so we can get rid of that poll, and I'm now going to ask you a file. Well, I think that poll was difficult enough. So Stephen, yeah, the CEO was an MD, so it's really whoever's in charge of running the operations inside the business. Now I'm going to ask you a more difficult one. I'm going to show you 10 behaviors I'm going to show you 10 behaviors in the poll, and I'm going to ask you, so I'm going to give you a minute to think about this one because it's quite hard, and we're going to go through these behaviors now. We've been talking a lot about what psychological safe space in the room, what is the right behavior to have in the room. So I'm going to ask you, which 3 of those would you consider are absolutely indispensable in terms of having the right climate inside the room for taking high quality strategic decisions? So let's keep that up, Natalie, please. High quality strategic decisions that guarantee overnight survival, long-term sustainable success, to grow the value of the organization for the benefit of all the stakeholders. So let's keep it up for the moment. Is it constructive challenge? Is it placing the entity before ego? The board, the NEDs, having sound judgment of the management team, teamwork inside the room, professionalism and accountability to colleagues. So somebody earlier mentioned that once you've taken the decisions, we share the accountability, collective responsibility, joint and several liability. We take the decision and move on together, even if we disagreed with it. Trust, we talked about the importance of trust. Emotional intelligence, can we have a board that only survives on the back of the chair having emotional intelligence, or do we need emotional intelligence more widely across the room? Do we need a board that isn't just fighting fires but has raised its eyes towards the horizon and is forward looking? Do we need a board which is action focused and believes in changing here and now and taking decisions which will move the organization on? Do we need a board which is versatile in its behavior, can move slowly and steadily, then quickly and rapidly? Do we have a board that can only move in one direction at one speed, or do we need a board that can move in different directions and different speeds depending on the circumstances? So I'm going to give you 15 more seconds to decide your view on which 3 characteristics do you view to be the most important in getting that board, your board, to work really effectively. So let's go. It's going to be really interesting. So let's have the results. Thank you. So constructive challenge, 73%. That's really interesting. Placing the entity first, entity before ego, absolutely. Sound judgment of the management team. Interestingly, that is what the board banks did not have at the time that the boards of the banks collapsed. They didn't have that right measure of the management team. Teamwork, 41%. Professionalism and accountability to each other, 41%. Trust, quite low at 18%. Emotional intelligence, also quite low, relatively low. Forward-looking, action-focused, and versatile. Look, I think we can spend more time on forward-looking. Let's keep these results up for the moment. We could spend more time talking about forward-looking, action-focused, and versatile. So let's keep this up. But I understand why those 3 might score more lowly. Emotional intelligence, I would want to score more highly. Trust inside the room, we have already said it's a deal breaker. And if there's not trust inside the room, then that really underpins what goes on inside the room. Teamwork, absolutely essential. Accountability to colleagues goes hand in hand, so it's not at all surprising they both get 41%. Sound judgment of the management team. Let's keep this up for the moment. I've worked with boards where the CEO has said to me, I can get anything past this board. Now, that is a really worrying state of affairs when the management team feel that they can control a board and manipulate a board to get what they want out of that board. So that's an issue. But the top 2, constructive challenge, completely agree with that. And entity before ego, completely agree with that. And when I'm doing board effectiveness reviews, I often find that those top two behaviors are the top two scoring. And I often say that I consider those top two to be the two most important behaviors in the room. So let's keep that up for the moment so people can look at that. Any quick comments in the chat box? So Bill, if you don't have action, you don't have strategy, which is a very fair point. Any other comments on any of that? Does any of that surprise anybody? So in summary, the two most important behaviors that we would look inside the boardroom is constructive challenge and ego before entity, followed by collaboration and accountability amongst the team. And then emotional intelligence, we agreed, being forward-looking, and then lower down, trust, judgment of the management team, being action-focused, being versatile. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. I would argue that all of these are important, and one would hope that all of the directors exhibit all of these between them. Now, you wouldn't expect any individual director to exhibit all of these on their own. But that is why the chair is important, to get all of these behaviors out of everybody and to be checking in and checking out on a regular basis to make sure that people are happy inside the room. And one of the things I'd say about checking in, checking out, let's keep this up for the moment, please, Natalie. One of the things I'd say about checking in, checking out is that if something does go wrong inside the room, and I've seen this happen in board meetings, I wouldn't look to simply the chair being responsible for saying, I'm not very happy with what is happening. I would want the whole board to say, look, I don't think this is going the way we would want that to go. And I think we should stop this conversation, or I think we should think about this conversation. And I've been in boards where the directors didn't do that, and they subsequently regretted that they didn't confront awkward behavior inside the room. And Darren, you're talking about strategic versus operational, obviously a big source of potential governance dysfunction on the board, and being forward-looking. Yeah, so versatility equals adaptability at board level, absolutely. And sometimes boards can't do that. Sometimes boards are very monodirectional and mono-speed, and they simply don't see changing circumstances around them. Okay, look, let's take that down now. So that was really interesting. So let's just spend a little bit of time looking. We've got about 10 minutes to, and we need to launch a poll at the end to allow Natalie just to ask you how you found the webinar, and if you'd like to know more about On Board. So we'll show these 3 slides relatively quickly because we've had the conversation, but by all means keep posting in the chat, please. So so I would say that the most important behavior in the room is the ability to raise questions, to challenge, and I call it the 6 C's. Does the chair create a climate of constructive, creative challenge? The 6 C's. Does the chair create a climate of constructive, creative challenge? Is there a psychological space for people to ask questions? And remember that the silly question or the awkward question is often the best question. And new board members who ask the silly question are often a real gift to a board, because the experienced directors have forgotten the answer and they don't want to look stupid by asking the question again. So the new board member who says, why do we do it like this, is often a gift to a board. Okay, ego before entity. I would agree that I would say for me, this is almost the second most important challenge and second most important behavior in the room, that to place independent oversight with members recognizing their principal duty is not to their own parochial interests. If they're members of the executive team and they're on the board, not to their executive interests, If they're outside, there's not that outside interest, but they are sitting on the board to place the entity first. And if you have anybody on the board who does not understand that, my advice would be get rid of them, because they are a danger and they are not safeguarding the interests of stakeholders. And if you've got shareholders, they're not safeguarding the interests of shareholders. You mark this one down quite a lot, but I will say again that this is where the bank boards in the 2007-8 financial crisis were found to be particularly wanting. That boards did not have a measure of their management teams and did not put their management teams in place, which was where the management team understands that they are there to service the board and they are there to service the entity, and the CEO and the attitude that she or he brings to the board meeting can be particularly critical in creating the right climate for the board meeting to take place, or can wreck the climate inside the board meeting. And Stephen, you're saying if the long-term focus is the longevity of the organization, then stakeholders will be looked after. I agree. I haven't always seen that in boards. I've seen boards, particularly commercial boards, think of stakeholders first. Richard Branson, a quote appeared on LinkedIn the other day. Richard Branson saying your most important stakeholder are your employees, your staff. If you treat them right, they will treat everybody else right around you. So I agree with you, Stephen, but I haven't always seen that on boards, but I completely agree with you. Okay, so what else would we expect? Teamwork, the ability to build relationships and influence others. So executives who serve on the board as non-executives are often the people who find it really a struggle to replace their hard power with soft power. I'm working with a board at the moment where there's a very forceful CEO who keeps telling the home team how they should do their job because they're full of passion. But actually, non-execs are there to influence. It's soft power, not hard power. Getting that right. Not all executive directors understand that on a board. So there's no hierarchy on a board. All board members are equal. There's a hierarchy back at, in the home team, in the executive, but there's no hierarchy inside the boardroom. Accountability to colleagues, joint and several liability, collective responsibility. You take a decision, you move forward together, getting everybody to perform at the highest level, really important. And so those two, collaboration and accountability, both scored 41%. So they were the joint second highest, or so joint number 3 in terms of the behaviors inside a room. Excuse my footballing analogy, but it's not behavior that the current England team are showing, and a serious point about their ability to work as a team rather than just work for themselves. Trust, you mark that down quite low, but trust is the golden currency of governance. And I would mark that more highly myself. I would want that to be a high score. If there's not trust in the room, we cannot achieve everything that we want to, and sometimes we can achieve nothing. If there's trust in the room, we can achieve everything. And to finish off, levels of emotional intelligence, really, really important to expect the chair to be full of emotional intelligence, checking in and checking out all the time. But we look for the directors sitting around the table to understand what the chair is trying to do and to be able to respond and reciprocate and spread that love around the room. Jack Ma of Alibaba called it love. We need more love in the room. Bill, is trust a behavior or consequence? It's both. of behaviors. Trust is part of a virtuous circle, which involves behaviors. Trust and culture feed behaviors, and they go round in a virtuous circle or a vicious circle if it's not working. But Jack Ma of Alibaba said we need love in the room, and that's emotional intelligence. Being forward-looking, trying to move the organization forward, being action-focused, which means having a strategy and working on the strategy, being versatile. These are all attributes, behavioral attributes that I would look for in a board in different levels and measures. All I would say is, if you're in a board where any of these is scoring lowly, I would ask you to think about what's going on in that board. And if you're in a board where all of these are humming and motoring, then you've got a really high performing engine. You've got a board which doesn't need to look under the bonnet, but can focus on the journey and on getting to the destination, which is growing value for the benefit of all the stakeholders in the long term. Now, because of the time, we've got a few minutes left. Natalie, I want to leave it to you now to launch that final poll. Would you like to talk to it, please?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Seamus, for that. That was fantastic. And yes, as Seamus mentioned, I will just launch a quick poll now. If anybody would like any more information on onboard, if you would like a one-on-one demo to start a free trial or just some additional information, let us know and we will be in touch. And then yeah, if you could just quickly rate the survey, so we can see how you enjoyed the masterclass, that would be great.
And we won't show the results of this. This is personal to you. So it's personal to
Yeah,
you and personal to Natalie. So don't worry about anyone else seeing how you score or rate any of this. So just please fill that in. That helps Natalie work out how we might do these things differently.
exactly.
Guys, it's been really good. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I hope you got something out of that in terms of the boards with which you work most closely, and I hope there's been some food for thought. You've made me think on a couple of key points. For example, if we've got a director in the room who's problematic, to what degree do we move them on, or for how long can we put up with their behavior before we move them on, and so on. It's great to have you. Good CPD for me. Goes onto my CPD register, goes onto Natalie's CPD register, goes onto all of your CPD registers. The world changes every day. We need to keep on learning. Thank you very much for being part of this. It's been real fun. As usual, time has flown. I've really enjoyed it. Natalie, thank you very much for providing the platform for having these CPD opportunities. Since COVID, these opportunities are invaluable for helping us to learn and to grow. Please vote on Thursday if you are able to vote. Help make the world a better place in whatever way you think it can become a better place. And look forward to staying in touch. So Stephen, you're at the other side of the world in Oz. Wow, that is a great contribution. Thank you very much. You can either put your pajamas on or take them off. I don't know what time of day it is.
Very late up there.
But anyway.
I know, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Seamus. So insightful as always. And thank you so much for taking the time to bring us all through that. And yes, everyone have a great day and we will speak soon.
Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.